So I'm very glad to follow the previous presentation because it touched on a lot of points that I also will be addressing, but from a more practical point of view. I was a translator. It was a long time ago. It looked very different from what it does today. Um, Now I've moved on to the technical field, or at least to the organization of the technical field. So I work daily on AI tools. But DGT has, so the Directorate-General for Translation at the European Commission, apparently the largest translation organization in the world. I have heard that the Mormons with their missionaries are a larger translation organization, but I haven't verified that. Um, we are riding the hype wave, as Helena calls it. So I don't know if she'll be happy with with what we're doing, with the approach we're taking, but I'll expose it to you, and also the impact that it's having on the staff, on how we work, on the people we're looking for, on the trainees we're looking for. Um, so first of all, as mentioned in my profile, I did start more than 25 years ago, and we've been wrestling with what it's like to be a translator. Probably you've seen this before. So what I think I do, of course, that was almost what it was like when I started in 1999, what my mom thinks I do, what my friends think I do, what my IT friends I think I do. That's been the topic of today, right? What do we do with MT? What do we do with AI? How much of how much of a role does the translator have? For me, it's an opportunity to change the role, to build the role, but a lot of additional skills are required. Just plain language skills, which was what brought me into the field a long time ago, are not enough. I think we need specialties. Of course, we're not interpreters. That's the next one. And what I really do, what I found well, okay, it's a little bit amusing. It's made the rounds, but what I found interesting was this is not that old. And yet what I really do when I look at it, it's like, well, I don't really have, or nor do my colleagues, lots of open books beside me, and they're not taking notes on a piece of paper. What they're doing is something like this, which many of you know, of course. So here I want to point out that we have faced technological evolution before, and we have adapted, and we do things very differently. And it did stress people out at the beginning. Before I was hired, during the interview, I asked to see what it was like to work in the office, and they took me by some offices where people were hunched over their desks, so that was not very exciting. But they took me to the pride of their floor at the time, which was the local library with all of the issues of the official journal that we could look things up in so that we could type them in and so on. That didn't actually last for much longer after I started. They also tried to train me to use a dictaphone because I had never used the dictaphone, but the bulk of the people who were there at that time were very happy dictaphone users, and they were not, I mean, they were very productive with dictaphones, and they were not as productive at all with the computer that they were being instructed to use. And they felt that that was the way that I should also work. But I had never used a dictaphone. I'd used a computer for years. So I was following in a new path, and now the dictaphone users have retired. So there is always that question of fighting a rearguard action or moving with the times. But that doesn't mean jumping on every new fad either. I want to point out all of the tools that we have available now. Some of them are available only internally. Many of them are available also externally. The only two on this list that were available when I started were, of course, the last one, dictionaries and glossaries, on paper at the time. Now all electronic. And Euramis was just starting. Euramis is our database of translated segments. So the results of translation memories, but there were just a few testers using Trados Studio Translators Workbench, augmenting it at the time. The other things, IATE is a terminological database. EURLEX is a public database of European legislation. CAT and SDL Trados Studio, CAT computer-aided translation. E-translation is our machine translation system that I have had the honor of helming for the past 8 years. Quest meta search is just multiple search, so search through multiple engines, search through databases, and so on. DGT Vista, a database of documents, and Doc Finder, a way to find whole documents through a meta search engine. So there is, and I don't even include term bases and so on here. We have a whole panoply of tools available to us already, which shapes the kind of work that we do. And it's, in my view at least, the AI revolution is going to strip many of these tools of their principal role, let's see. I see it going very much towards validation. I would like to just gradually take you through the evolution within DGT, more step by step. So first of all, in 1975, so I say before the century, I said in my profile I arrived before the turn of the century. It was 1999, but it makes it more dramatic to say before the turn of the century. 1975 was when they were using dictaphones and typewriters. At that time, the translators, when they were using their dictaphones, they did not have to do quotations the way that we have to, that I have to. They would simply say, quote, Article 4 of blah, blah, blah. And it was up to the typing pool to go and look up the quotation in the appropriate language and put it into the final document. They took it as an insult, as a deprecation, as a dismissing their skills when it became their job to look up the translation and put it into the text. That was something that caused a fair bit of resistance among the translation pool at DGT. When I arrived, there were still a few people who really did not want to do that. They felt it was not their job. Anybody can look something up and put it in. So there's tensions have always existed. 1993 PCs were there. I got one when I was there. 95, the first translations were stored digitally. That's how what is now Euramis that I described started to take shape. We do a big jump here to 2013 with Trados Studio, Office. Now we start to see the translator's role had to evolve to take account of actual, well, not quite artificial intelligence, but assistance by knowledge technology, information technology. The plethora of tools meant that a lot of people were having, well, you're under pressure. You're under pressure to produce your documents, produce them to specific deadlines, and you don't have time to to focus on every new tool, to learn how to use every new tool optimally. So we set up this staff role. They're called master trainers. Their role was to provide courses, to provide introductions to everyone, all newcomers, on our basic tools, but also to act as a point of reference where people were having difficulty. It's a very important role, still exists today, except of course what they're teaching people has evolved considerably. Um, After this network became very important, we set up what we call the CATE lab. It's CATE CAT Computer Assisted Translation Education Lab. So it's for testing how computer assisted translation tools are evolving. And that continues today, of course. In 2017, that was when we launched eTranslation. It followed on from previous machine translation tools, but it was a big change because of the neural engines. The earlier tools were statistical. They'd worked pretty well for some languages, such as Greek, such as the Latin languages. They were quite disastrous for things like Hungarian and Finnish. Neural engines changed that, and MT started to become a regular tool. Now, we did have at that time the same sort of split of opinion that has been evoked today in various discussions. There were people who loved the new technology, who wanted to play with it to see what they could do. I was a proponent. I guess you can guess that since this is around, well, I switched from translation in 2014. So I was very curious about this technology. Also very aware of the flaws that it had. also very aware of the argument that was already being made at that time that it would devalue the translation profession because people would think the machine can do everything, which to a certain extent, I think has happened as we see Joss referred to the brain drain that we have. And I was speaking in Paris 2 weeks ago to a similar conference to students. And one of the professors is about to publish her annual survey in Belgium of the translation industry. And she actually described it as heartbreaking, which is very pessimistic. I haven't seen the survey. I hope it's because she knows some of the people personally, but we do know that it's a difficult time and adjustments need to be made. In 2018, we expanded on the master trainer role. The master trainers were really supposed to focus on giving courses and sometimes provide advice. Turned out they were giving advice a lot. It was too much for some of them, taking away from their main duties. So we created language technology coordinators. And they did not have the teaching role, although sometimes it's filled by the same person. The master trainers continue to exist. But the language technology coordinators are supposed to help spread the knowledge within their units, within their groups. And we did jump on the AI hype. We started an AI incubator group to see what could be done with AI. And in 2021, we built that into a DGT AI network, which has become a corporate AI network. So commission-wide, we are, as translators, if you'd like to look at it that way, because the core team is former translators. We're focusing on spreading knowledge, also warnings, but also use cases about AI. What can it be used for? What can it not be used for? What are the risks? Where does it mess up? I mean, hallucinations are a huge topic because, well, we are not so bad, but those of you with your students, I'm sure you've had people tell you, well, ChatGPT told me this or ChatGPT told me that. And it's like, yeah, well, ChatGPT told you wrong, you know? So we do try to spread this knowledge, very much knowledge of the risks, but we also want to leverage this technology as best we can. So the roles that we have, it's not just being a translator, just being a translator. That's the hub of everything. That's the core of what we do, trying to help knowledge pass accurately between different language groups. But there's a whole constellation around that. The master trainers, the language technology coordinators that I mentioned, the linguistic assistants who help handle the bureaucratic matters and do document prep and so on. Quality managers who are preparing workflows, checklists, approaches to how we handle documents to try to minimize common errors. Terminologists, of course, building up databases. And I'll just stress the language editors, which ever since I've been at DGT, and I'm sure before, and at many conferences that I attend, a common complaint is the source texts are bad, which I don't contest that. I think a lot of the time the source texts are bad, which makes them very difficult to translate. We do offer an editing service, which is intended to improve usually the English originals. It's also offered in French, but nowadays the European Commission produces over 90% of its documents in English, all written by non-native speakers. So we have been pushing to try to improve those originals. It's an uphill battle. I think it's worth fighting because you do get results. But I think it's a battle that will never be won. We will never get only really well written documents. And that's because documents are written against deadlines, they're written by committee, they're shifted around to people who make last minute changes that don't make sense to the beginning of the document and so on. But it helps, and it also raises awareness. And we've just been restructured, and there is a team now intended to evangelize this service throughout the European Commission, to make people really aware, to try to make them aware of the importance of language, of clarity, from the beginning of the inception of legislation, but also letters, anything that is especially stuff that is intended for the general public. So there's a lot, but that's DGT. Now, we should look a little bit outside DGT. We have one aspect that I found very interesting when I was in Paris last week, because I think we are a little bit in a bubble in DGT. I'm fortunate in that it's a civil service job, which means that they don't do direct downsizing, right? Uh, you can downsize through attrition and so on, but they don't just say, well, sorry, no demand, you're gone. Plus, there is demand. The other point, we work on legislation. You need some sort of specialty. And the other point here that I was really raised in this previous session in Paris, which is fresh in my mind, and I think it applies here, is that you need something else. So you need a skill. You need what was very popular there, two other people on a panel, was transcreation, which has been raised before. Not so much localization, and they took pains to make the distinction. We're talking about one young woman running an agency and about another young woman who works for what was only identified as a major fashion house because she was not allowed to say who she worked for. And she is responsible for the transcreation of their ads for the risks that have been raised in some of the previous presentations. That is, things that you say in one language, you can't just translate the words and expect them to work in another language. So there's that aspect of cultural knowledge that you really need to know, that you really need to be aware of. That also calls into question the way we have worked at DGT. I have colleagues who have collected languages throughout their career. They have a passion. I have a medium passion, but they are extremely passionate. I have people who have 13, 15 languages because they do one language, they do one course, and then after they've completed it, 4 years or 5 years, they move on to another language and they gather it again. Sometimes they even take another one in the evening just for fun. And that's great. They cover a lot of the languages, but they do not have the in-depth cultural knowledge in every language that they have studied during that period. They have a certain amount of knowledge. So I don't think the fact that you know many languages is going to be the trump card that it used to be. It was very important for us to cover all of the languages for a period, but now, as the profession evolves, I would suspect less so. Okay, let me move away from this brief digression to return to DGT. Just so you know what we look like. A couple of points here. First of all, demand. Demand has not gone down. Demand, if anything, has gone up. We see it in human translation. We see it in the outsourcing. So the orange bar, the green bar, and we also see it in machine translation. When we started, we translated 18 million pages in 2017 in a year. This year, we're headed for about 600 million pages. Internal things, external things, all sorts of things that previously were not translated at all. And unfortunately, you'll see here the little red line, which is the attrition of our staff numbers. So if you go back to 2011, you see that we were just about at 2,500 people. And this year, we're at just below 2,000 for the entire organization. Now, this it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. The goal of DGT has never been to lose translators. It's always been to keep as many as we can. However, there's a political goal to shrink the size of the European institutions, the number of staff. That has been a goal for a long time because political goals shift according to who is in place and cost savings and so on. And DGT was seen as a target. was seen as well translation. And this is the danger. And this is why we do need to try to make people aware of the difficulty of translation and all of the skills that are brought to translation that, well, the machines can do it now. You can give back 3% of your staff every year, which was done through attrition and so on. That was planned to go on to 2027. We protested lightly, but we've gotten to the stage now where we are staging. It's not a protest as in translators on the streets, but our management is taking the position with their management that we have been reduced to the extent that we cannot achieve the goals of the European Commission with regard to communicating to the people of Europe if they continue to squeeze us. So we're not immune to that pressure, a little bit protected, but you see again that the demand has not gone down. They just assume, as other people have alluded to, that it's just so much easier to do. So now 2,000 people, 70% are translators, 30% are other staff. I am one of the other staff. I was one of the translators. Now I am a team leader for AI tools that we use within the Commission. Now the obvious one, here they are, the ones that we currently have. The one that started it all is e-translation. I suppose that some of you have heard of it in other events. So machine translation system, I'll explain a little bit afterwards, built on our own internal data mostly. But we've expanded using the LLMs to do other jobs that translators still do, but have never liked necessarily either. One of them was to summarize documents because a summary is maybe even worse than translation in the sense that though people requesting a summary assume that you can skim a document in an afternoon, even when it's 200 pages long, and provide a one-page summary that will cover everything that they want to know, which is not very realistic. And in reality, what started happening was that the translator would read the document and then they would set up a session with the requester to ask questions, kind of get an interview about the document. I think you can see that that is sort of an ideal AI use case with these chatbots. You can upload your documents and you can start typing questions about them. Our tool doesn't do that yet. It's much simpler, but there is a good role for those machines there. E-reply is for drafting replies to questions, and e-briefing is to brief people going on missions about what they're supposed to talk about and so on, all on the basis of input documents. So people need to use these tools and they need to provide the useful information. And I would mention something that's very important because the human in the loop aspect is essential for us. And we have been very strong on this, including for e-translation. We always state that these things were produced through IT means, and that it's very important that somebody checks through them to make sure that they're accurate, that you cannot assume that they're accurate. I think for e-translation, I mean, if you look at Google Translate and DeepL and so on, they do have such disclaimers, but those disclaimers are usually buried deep in the terms and conditions. If you go on the Europa web pages that the Commission has and you land on one of them that is machine translated, we start with a disclaimer to say, look, be aware that this is machine translation. There may be a mistake. I think we're much more aware of this, or place much more emphasis on this than most machine translation vendors do. So just to quickly go through these tools, I'd like to mention, so e-translation, what it looks like. We focused on the EU languages. We added a few more which were considered socially and economically relevant. Importance here was that it's very focused on EU language. You see here that we have a set of domains. So general text, EU formal language. Let's look at them a little bit more dramatically. So EU formal language, that's the one built with our own texts. Now, we saw in a previous presentation, we saw the benchmarks of LLMs against some MT systems, and we saw that sometimes the LLMs were outperforming the MT systems. I had one of my team run a test because obviously for us, running an MT system, the AI systems are also a challenge. Fortunately for us, with regard to this, which tries to produce a very specific translation in the EU style, the LLMs were significantly worse. And here we're talking about GPT-4. Now, we also have general text engines, which are more general purpose. And there we saw what I believe it was Joss in the presentation showed, that the LLM is about the same. Sometimes better, sometimes worse, depends on the language. We also have EU case law, so that's the same situation. It's that it is very specific. It's very specific to a special selected, curated number of court cases that the Court of Justice has delivered to us. They have a special vetting process for translations that are of significant legal importance. And we only use those to build this. It's very heavily used by them, and there the LLMs just didn't compare. And lastly, a finance engine, which was the same sort of scenario. That is, the national central banks provided us with data, and it's available to the national central banks, but very much designed for their use case. Now, all of these tools were driven by translators and are used by translators as a standard tool nowadays. We did track adoption for a long time. About 3 years ago, we stopped because for the last couple of years, it's just been, I mean, even before we stopped, the numbers weren't moving very much. The machine translation was being used in about 80% of documents. The other 10, 20% was accounted for by, subsequent versions, modifications of previous translations, and so on, where the changes were minimal. This is e-summary. So here people can get their own summaries. People can upload their documents, choose how long they want their summary to be. Standard is about 10% of the total document. Long is about 20%, and short is very short. It's a few lines. Now, this is important because of the scenario that I described before. There was one thing that the translators didn't like about summarizing. One, because people tended to underestimate the amount of time it takes to read a document to be able to answer detailed questions on it. And secondly, when you're doing that, your other deadlines are building up. So it was seen as a rather ungrateful task that put a lot of pressure on them. So this allows people to do it on their own, users to do it on their own, and it takes away the pressure from our translators. There has been actually a strong push by what we call our planning department to try to reduce the workload on translators. As I mentioned, you've seen that the staff numbers are going down while demand is staying steady. This is the sort of thing that the summary looks like. Okay, so you could start with Swedish. This is another point. You don't have to know the language. And in fact, it could detect the language, so even the user doesn't need to know the language. They can just put in a document that they know, hey, Lithuania has provided this response on steel imports. Please check basically their line, and you can get it right away. Another thing that we're doing, but this was not a translator's job, so I'll just go through it quite quickly, is writing briefings. This came up as something that general civil servants were not very interested in. Not very interested. It's a very repetitive task that they have to do quite commonly. And it, again, requires a lot of background work. And if it can be simplified, they much appreciate that. So here, all they have to do is upload their documents, choose the type of template. So Briefing EU is very much along the lines of our standard instructions for briefing people, which is that you have a general summary. Where are you going? Who are you meeting? What will the main topics be? What has the commission's position been? And so on. So this also uses the large language models. These last two use GPT-4 under Microsoft Azure. Now, I have to say that this is another problem which hasn't been touched on here, which is sovereignty. We're very concerned about sovereignty. We've done a lot with the AI Act. You saw in the last presentation that Europe is doing a lot of work on the ethics of AI, sustainability, as Joss mentioned, with regard to data centers and so on. But we are not the leaders in any of the actual LLM development. We have a couple of reasonable players with Mistral and Aleph Alpha, but they are not up to the level of GPT-4 or Anthropic and so on. So there's another challenge there. We've been talking about ethics. We've been talking about the impact it will have on translation. We've been talking about the impact on about sustainability, the potential impact on the climate. But there's also a geopolitical impact. Does Europe want to be the one who only uses things done by others? Falcon was raised as an LLM that we didn't want. Okay, we said a Western point of view, but you could say, is there a difference between a European point of view and an American point of view? Do we just want to use American LLMs all the time? Okay, and then e-reply is a similar system to help people draft replies. So you could see here that DGT has gone beyond translation. We've really jumped on the AI bandwagon, if you wish. All of the European Commission and the institutions are really trying to see what they can do to make the most of this technology. We have a strong awareness that it is not perfect. We had that for machine translation. We have it for AI as well, but our focus is on using it to streamline our operations to the extent possible. Now, this event is sponsored by DGT, with Leonidas being here as well. So I'm going to mention as well the traineeships at DGT. We, of course, take 24 trainees, I believe. I might be wrong on that number. Twice a year, Blue Book trainees to be trained as translators. They come to us for 5 months, and they learn how we work. They learn to translate. They meet other nationalities, learn how they translate, and so on. But in my sector, we've also started to take in some trainees, and we are now advertising specifically for an AI trainee as well. This is one of our recent trainees, Monica Albini, who left us half a year ago. She's now working in Turin in a translation agency, but working on adapting it to AI systems and machine translation. This is her first job, so it's good for her. Good for her. She's applying the skills that she learned, but she did not find a pure translation job. She found a translation job connected to technology. You can see her quote there. I also want to mention from her quote, I learned a lot about prompt engineering. That was raised in the previous session, the previous presentation. Prompt engineering is something that we also believe is very well suited to a translator's mindset, because as translators, at least in our jobs in particular at the Commission, but really anytime you need to translate something, there's a need for rigor, there's a need for precision, there's a need through thinking through what you're trying to say and conveying it specifically in words. So those are sorts of skills that you can build on in order to do really effective prompt engineering, is what we believe. And we've now set out a call within DGT for people who are interested in becoming prompt engineers, and we will have 2 such positions in my AI sector. So you do see it's evolving. It's not just knowing another language and being to change words, change what someone has said into a different set of words. It's really about how can you work with all the tools that are available to apply your creativity to make something much more effective as an ad, or how can you apply your legal skills that you have learned, for example, at the Court of Justice? How can you apply them to this text to certify that it truly says what it says? Because we know AI can't do that. It's about how can you use prompt engineering to build up language tools. It's really all about what do you bring on top of your language, your pure language skills? Is it your rigorous mindset? Is it your creativity? Is it your knowledge in other fields? There's something that you need, and that's what we're looking for. And I think that's, well, it's been a long time since I left university, but I think that that's what students need to be thinking about when they prepare for the next step into the outside world. So I will close there. Thank you very much.